Sophie here. Thanks for having me and thanks for all the really great questions. Sorry it took so long to get back to you guys. Just been super busy with winning the Jiu-Jitsu World Championships, woo, and training a lot and just trying to get everything in order around here. But I have some free time today and I'm more than happy to go through all the questions you guys sent me. So me and my dog Penny, she's sleeping with her stuffed animal. We're going to go through all these questions you guys sent us. So the first one I have here is from The Emperor Rises, and it says, I imagine the choice to become a professional fighter is a tough thing to explain to friends and family, and probably twice as hard for women. Did you get any negative feedback about making this choice? And if so, has it died down now that you're fighting in the UFC? And that's a really good question. Sometimes I get a little bit of hate like online or something, and there's definitely a lot of people out there that think that women should not be fighting, but I think that those people are entitled to their opinion. So there's a lot of sports that I'm not a big fan of, like NASCAR. I don't like NASCAR, and I'm entitled to have my opinion, and people that think that women shouldn't fight are also entitled to their opinion, even if I think that that's silly. From my family, at first, they definitely thought that like it was just kind of a crazy venture, and they thought it was kind of crazy. And then as I started progressing in my fight career and winning all these fights, and then I, fought on TV, and then I was part of Invicta, and then won the championship belt, and then finally to the UFC. The further and further I made it in my fight career, the less my family had to say about it. So. Yeah, I think that as I showed that I was serious about it, they became more serious about it. The next one is from PND. Since you grew up in Alaska, have you had any encounters with bears? I am terrified of them, and I live in bear country as well. No, I've never come across a bear without some kind of protection between myself and the bear. Like I've seen them, run across the road in front of my car or in front of somebody else's car. I've never come face to face with a bear, but whenever I hike or camp or anything like that, especially when I worked on a fire crew in Alaska, I was on a wildland firefighting crew, and we always had bear mace and stuff like that, and we carried a gun, not on each person, but one person in our unit would have a gun on them just in case something like that would happen. So I think it's just a matter of making a ton of noise and making sure you're careful with your trash and being prepared in case something like that happens. And then from the same person, they said, what is the MMA scene like in Alaska? There have been a few fighters from there that have had success, like Sam Hoger, Cody McKenzie. Terrence Mitchell seems to be on his way up. Did it seem more difficult for you to get attention of the southern states? The MMA scene in Alaska is pretty strong. We have one big promotion that's put on more than 100 shows. They meet almost every month and they put on an MMA show, and we get a lot of fighters that fight consistently up there. And the grappling scene in Alaska is really, really strong. There's a lot of really good wrestlers. There have been several very high-level female wrestlers that have come out of Alaska, and there's quite a few black belts up there too. So there's a lot of places for good grappling for sure. As far as striking, there have been some high-level strikers that came out of Alaska, but as far as putting it all together, I would definitely recommend that, somebody from Alaska, from a small town, might want to check out a bigger camp like the MMA Lab or Alpha Male or Jackson's or something like that to get the experience of having a lot of high-level training partners. But yeah, the MMA scene in Alaska is something I'll always be grateful for. The crowds up there are crazy. The promotions that do go on up there are pretty cool. And yeah, there's no place like Alaska, and that includes the MMA scene. The next question is from Wild, and it just says, can you tell us about your background, like where you grew up, what you like to do as a kid, what your first car was, where you worked, and what kind of shitty jobs you had? Well, I was born and raised in Alaska. I think most people know that. I lived there for the first 30 years of my life. And growing up as a kid, my parents divorced when I was a baby, and my mom lived out in the country, like on a dirt road way out in the middle of nowhere. And my dad lived in a city, in Alaska's biggest city. So he lived in a regular neighborhood. The houses were all close together, and a lot of kids would come out and play. And we had a lot of friends that lived on that street. And so it was really kind of night and day for me. I would go to my mom's house most of the time and go to school. And then I would go visit my dad on the weekends and in the summer and stuff like that, and live in the city. And both, I guess, were fine. I always wanted to live in a big city like San Francisco or something like that. But when I was at my mom's house, I would play in the woods, and my brother and I would walk down this dirt road to the neighbors who lived, like a quarter mile away or a half mile away or something like that. And we would go play with them, and just, generally run around and get dirty and stick fight and play in the puddles and I don't know, whatever else country kids do. And then when we would go to our dad's house, we would do all the things that city kids do. And we would go ride our bikes downtown and hang out with all the neighborhood kids and walk to the park and stuff like that. My dad died when I was 11. He was killed in a plane crash in 1995. And so obviously that really changed the course of my life. And I moved out to my mom's house after that. I went to school out there through high school. I dropped out of high school in 10th grade, and I just started working. I went and got my GED, and I got a job working at Walmart and a few other like entry-level positions that didn't require any kind of education. And I started delivering pizzas after a while, which I actually really liked when I was a teenager. I was 18 years old, and I had my first car, which, by the way, was a Ford Contour, and it was periwinkle blue. And I would deliver pizzas in my Ford Contour and just bomb around and listen to music and, make a lot of tips and stuff like that. So to me, that was a great job, but it couldn't last forever. My son was born when I was 17, and fortunately I had a lot of help raising him. I had a really good family that came together and would help me a lot because I was so young. So I'm really grateful to them for giving me so much support when I was younger. What else? Yeah, I guess, growing up as a kid, we did pretty much normal stuff that kids like to do. I never did play any sports or anything like that when I was a kid. When I was really, really little, my dad put me on a softball team, but I was afraid of the ball, so that never really went anywhere. But after my dad died, he died when I was 11, and I just didn't really have any outlets. My mom lived so far out in the country, it was hard for us to really get involved in any activities or anything like that. So it was kind of isolated after that, but we made it through, and everything worked out just fine. Okay, this next question is from Gangster Catherine. I like the username. That's pretty sweet. And she just says, as a female fighter, what kind of animosity have you faced? As a young girl, my mother wouldn't let me do martial arts because it isn't ladylike, but I see women like you out there killing it in the sport and still representing women very well. Thank you. Thanks a lot. And I totally understand that. Like, my mom's ex-husband, when I was growing up, was not into women doing anything that was not ladylike. And as I got older and I told him that I was fighting, he definitely thought that was kind of weird. But there's a lot of people out there that think that women, shouldn't be doing unladylike things. I think like a couple famous fighters like GSP and Fedor have made comments to that effect. And I think that they're totally allowed to have their opinion. That's just fine. Everybody has opinions about some stuff, and that's their opinion on what women should and should not be like, and that's, so be it. So I don't really take that as animosity. Sometimes on Twitter, we'll get guys that make really mean comments about, like, do you have balls? Do you have a dick? Or whatever. And I know that a lot of women in the sport get comments like that. I'm not the only one. Chris Cyborg does too, and she retweets that kind of stuff a lot. And really, I think that no matter what you do, if you're going to be even semi-successful at anything, you're always going to have some haters that are going to talk down to you and be jealous and act shitty, and they just want to bring people down to make themselves feel better, I guess. So when I come across stuff like that, I just try to keep it in mind and not hate back. I think there's enough hate in the world without returning hate with hate. So good question, though. I think a lot of female fighters face stuff like that. Okay, so the next question is from Alienator, and they said, I have a couple questions for you. What is your favorite technique you have not pulled off in the cage but maybe have in training? I love this question. So it's a Peruvian necktie, which is a jiu-jitsu choke, and it's kind of fancy, and you have to hit it kind of fast, and I really like that. You can get it from a front headlock position, and I end up there a lot, and I've hit it a couple times in training, but it's a pretty low percentage move, but I think it's definitely like a $50,000 bonus move if I were to ever hit that in a cage. So I've been practicing it. I'm not great at it yet, but hopefully I could like hit something like that someday. And the next question is, what is the best part of being a pro fighter and what is the hardest part? And I think the best part of being a pro fighter is that I get to pick my own schedule. I don't have a boss to answer to. My success depends completely on me. So if I get up early in the morning and I'm on the grind right away, that's totally up to me. Or I can wake up later and set my own schedule and just do the workouts that I think are appropriate for my career. So if I only do striking workouts, then obviously I'm going to be really lacking in my wrestling and jiu-jitsu. Or if I only do jiu-jitsu, I'm going to be really lacking in my striking. And I like having control over that. I like that it's up to me. I also really like wearing sweatpants all day. I like going home and taking a nap every afternoon, and I really like hanging out with my team. One of the best parts of being a fighter to me is being surrounded by other pro athletes on a daily basis and just witnessing like their greatness every day. It's really awe-inspiring. It's amazing. I wish everybody could witness how hard, pro athletes work, not just fighters, but all pro athletes. And so being able to witness that daily and bleed and sweat and cry with these guys that are chasing their dreams has just been an invaluable experience. And the hardest part of being a pro fighter, I think, is, well, there's a couple things I think that are really hard. Staying on the grind every single day is difficult. It's hard to get up every day and get your ass kicked and work to the point of exhaustion every single day willingly and try to keep a good attitude and try to keep in mind that this is making you better. I think people a lot of times think that pro fighters wake up and just go to the gym and they have like a nice lift, a nice relaxing pump on the weights, and then they go and they roll around with their buddies, and then they go home and then they might come back and do, a sparring session or something like that. And it's really not like that. It really is a really tough grind. Like when we do our strength and conditioning, it is exhausting and it is hard and it's frustrating. And when when we're grappling, we are grappling with some of the best people in the world and we're getting our ass kicked a lot. So there's, I think, a misconception out there about what fighters are doing all day. And it's very difficult and it's hard to do it day after day after day. And the last question is, what is your guiltiest pleasure on earth? Well, I don't know if I can say it on this video. No, I guess my go-to would be probably, I don't know, I'm sure everybody lists some kind of food. I really like sweet, rich food, and I can eat that a lot. But I guess really my guiltiest pleasure is that sometimes I do just like to sit at home and sit on my ass and, surf the internet and play games and do nothing all day. And it's kind of it's fun to do every once in a while, but nobody can live like that forever. And that's probably my guiltiest pleasure, is just taking a really, really lazy day or lazy week and doing nothing. And usually after I fight, I will take a day. Well, take more than a day. Usually I'll take a week and just sit on my ass and not do anything. So the next question is from Kelly. And Kelly says, I remember Bill Mahood being a well-known fighter from Prince George, BC, which isn't too far from Alaska. Have you ever met him? And the answer is no. I actually have no idea who that is. So, sorry. And then also, what is your favorite piece of MMA memorabilia and why? And I would say my favorite piece of MMA memorabilia is probably my Invicta belt, because it's so pretty and it's really well made. And I've won other belts from other promotions before, and they're just not as nice as my Invicta belt is. And, my Invicta belt just symbolized a lot to me. Like, I never thought I would be the Invicta champion. And at the time when I first signed with Invicta, that was before women were allowed in the UFC. And so for me to even be signed with Invicta and to have other women in my weight class at the time before they were signed to the UFC, like Sarah Kaufman and Alexis Davis and Sarah McMahon, really meant a lot to me. And then, eventually those women went to the UFC and I stayed in Invicta long enough to win the championship. And then I went to the UFC. But let me see. I think my Invicta belt is up here. I'll show you guys. Yep, there it is in the corner. Anyway, I To me, that's my favorite piece of MMA memorabilia. Oh, see, I have all your guys' questions printed out. And then this question is from Wild again. Who's hotter, Elias Theodoro or Alan Joban? And I think Alan Joban is way hotter. I don't know, because I don't always like the long hair on the guys. You know what I mean? So Alan Joban's pretty hot. From Naraknu, what is your motivation in challenging Leslie Smith? Well, first of all, unfortunately, I didn't get that fight. I believe Leslie Smith is fighting Irene Aldana. So that's unfortunate, but I hope it's a good fight. And the whole reason I wanted to fight Leslie Smith was because she's so exciting, and she comes forward and she throws down and she doesn't care. You know, to her, it's not just about winning the next fight. It's about putting on a great fight. And I love that. I love that attitude. I've been a big fan of Leslie Smith since I saw her fight Caitlin Young in Invicta. Yeah, and I'm just so sick of fighting boring women. Like, I'm just so tired of it. It seems like ever since I got into the UFC, women don't want to put on a good show anymore. It's like they get to the UFC and they just choke, which I totally understand, but they, you know, like Sarah McMahon is pretty known for having boring fights. She just kind of lays and prays. Liz Carmouche has not had an exciting fight since she fought Ronda Rousey. Caitlin Chookagian, I feel like just backed up a lot and really didn't want to get hit, didn't want to get taken down, didn't want to really engage. And I'm just tired of fighting women like that, you know. So Leslie Smith is the opposite of all that, and she throws down every time, which is definitely my kind of fight. So go Leslie Smith. I'll be cheering her on when she fights Irene Aldana. The next one is from Mystic Mac. What do you think about Ronda coming back, and how might you handle a fight against her? I think it's great that Ronda's coming back. I don't know Ronda at all, so I don't know what her motivation is or, you know, what she's thinking. But I think she has done more for this sport single-handedly than, you know, any woman ever, and maybe more than any woman ever will again. So, you know, I really like Ronda as an athlete. I don't know her as a person, but I think her athletic accomplishments are just out of this world. I think it's more than any of us could even have dreamt of. And not only did she dream of it, but she accomplished it. And so I just think that's awesome, you know. And how might I have handled a fight against her? Whew. I'd probably just try to hit her as hard as I could, which of course a lot of people have tried and failed at. But, you know, in the moment, I think that's what you go for. You know, and now of course a lot of people, I think, whoever fights her next, Amanda Nunes and maybe whoever's after Amanda, are going to try to copy that Holly Holm style of stick and move and make her frustrated. But yeah, Ronda's one of the best in the world, and unless you are a master at sticking and moving like Holly is, or you're a knockout artist like Amanda Nunes is, I'm not sure there's going to be a lot of success there. So it would have been great to compete against Ronda, but man, just because she's done so much for the sport and she's such an icon. This one is from Jason73, and it says, if you could beat the crap out of one celebrity or politician, who would it be and why? And, you know, originally my answer to that was Donald Trump, because I'm just not a big fan of some of the rhetoric that he used in his campaign. But he's going to be our president, and I hope he does a great job. So I'm going to change my answer to Steve Bannon, who I think is about to, you know, be big in the public eye, and he kind of gives a platform and supports some really awful ideas about, you know, women and people of different religions and homosexuals, and just, you know, that's stuff that I feel really strongly about. I'm big on equality, and, you know, kind of a feminist, and I don't really tolerate that kind, you know, I don't tolerate that kind of talk very well. So I'm going to pick Steve Bannon, but just know that that list changes daily. So don't read too much into that answer. And from the same person, what would you be doing if you were not a fighter? And, you know, the truth is, I don't know. I don't know what I want to be when I grow up. Could be, you know, anything really. That's one thing that fighting has taught me, is that I'm capable of anything that I put my mind to, and a little bit of hard work and perseverance really, really goes a long way. So I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up. We're looking into nursing school. I've also thought about getting a degree in poli-sci. I don't know. I've thought about becoming a teacher. I've thought about becoming a lawyer. Like I've thought about becoming a lot of different things, and I think I just have to figure out what I'm passionate about next. And who knows? It might be like maybe we're going to go open our own gym someday. My husband's going to be a black belt pretty soon. And I think, with my experience and his coaching ability and his knowledge, I think we could open up a great gym. So that might be our next focus, but I'm not sure. So stay tuned. And do you ever see MMA as an Olympic sport? I don't. I don't see it as an Olympic sport because I think that if you water down MMA to the point where it's just a point system or, there's not a lot of violence really involved, which I think is what you would have to do to make it an Olympic sport. I think you'd have to take a lot of the violence out of the equation. Then I think it's just not going to be as interesting. Like the reason people are so drawn to MMA and the reason they want to see good fights is they don't really want to see point fighters. They want to see blood. They want to see wars of attrition. They want to see knockouts. They want to see just nasty submissions. And that's kind of what makes it, so appealing, is that it really appeals to people's like primal desire to see that kind of stuff. And I think if you make it an Olympic sport, you're going to have to take a lot of that out of it. So I don't think it'll be an Olympic sport, and I kind of hope it won't. Like I think MMA is pretty unique in that it's far past just point fighting, or it's supposed to be at least. And last question from Jason73. Are you in favor of an MMA fighters union? Why or why not? And on that, I don't really have much of an opinion. I would be in favor of a union if it was fair to the fighters. And I think that there are unions out there that don't do much good for the people that are a part of them. And, I'm not super educated on the topic, but if there's going to be a fighters union, I want it to be very fair for the fighters. And I want it to be in a fashion that MMA can progress as a sport. Fighters will have a say and they'll get paid more. So if that could happen, I would be in favor of it. But if it's going to be a situation where a union is formed and fighters are under the thumb of just another type of management company, then I don't think I would be in favor of it very much. Thank you for the question. So this next question is from Pinhead. So sweet handle there, Pinhead. And it says, what would your ideal commentary team be? And I really, really like John Anik and Brian Stan. Anik, I think, is just super funny. He's really good at giving and taking in the commentary. He doesn't run over his commentating partner with too much dialogue, but he also interjects, really interesting stuff when he's supposed to. Brian Stan, being an ex-fighter, I think is just super, super knowledgeable. I really like it when ex-fighters commentate because they fought in the UFC before. So, Brian Stan, Dominic Cruz, Dan Hardy, Miesha Tate, whenever any of those people are commentating on the fights, I always listen up because they know what it's like to be in there. And I think they give the fighters a lot of respect and they can relate a little bit more. And I think that's just priceless. So my ideal commentary team is Brian Stan and John Anik, and I've been lucky enough to have them commentate a couple of my fights before, which is awesome. So I love those guys, and I think they should just run for president and vice president as far as I'm concerned. This question is from PND, and they're just asking about Invicta. It's been great to see the growth of women's MMA. Invicta deserves a ton of credit for that. What was it like to fight for them, and do you have any stories about Shannon Knapp? And I think that Invicta does deserve a ton of credit for the growth of women's MMA. One of the biggest things that they did was they allowed women to fight in their own weight classes. So before Invicta came along, there was, a big discrepancy. Women were fighting way up out of their weight class, or they'd have to cut a ton of weight, or they were fighting somebody maybe that had a lot more experience than them or a lot less experience than them. And so I think before Invicta came along, finding a fair, even matchup in women's MMA was not easy. And then when Invicta was started, they created weight classes. Women could finally fight in their own weight class, which just changed the whole landscape. You didn't have women that were exhausted because they had cut too much weight. You didn't have them fighting somebody that was, 3 times their size. I think that just changed the whole game. And then on top of fighting in their own weight class, they could also fight an opponent that had similar experience, which also is a big deal. So Invicta really gave women a chance to fairly showcase their skills, and I think they did that really, really well, as evidenced by, the UFC starting a women's division. So I don't really have very many interesting stories about Shannon Knapp. Shannon and I didn't have the best relationship. It's important to remember that Shannon Knapp is a fight promoter, and she's going to have a different relationship with the fighters than maybe she has with the public. And it's her job to, keep everybody in line. And it's our job as fighters to look out for ourselves and our own best interests. And that's almost, always going to come in conflict with what we want as opposed to what the fight promoter wants, So there were definitely times where Shannon Knapp and I butted heads, which I think is unfortunate, but I think that's unfortunate. But, I have a lot of respect for her and everything that she did do for women's MMA, and I think she's taken it to a place that wouldn't have been possible without her and the things that she did. So, and, when I fought for Invicta, it was also, they were still fairly new. They've had almost 20 shows now, and when I fought for them, they had less than 10. And right when I came along, the matchmaker that they had at the time left pretty unexpectedly, and this was before Julie Kedzie started being the matchmaker, and now Caitlin Young works for them too. And so I had some really bad experiences with people that worked for Shannon Knapp. Not just Shannon, but people that worked for her. And so I think that made a big difference too. But, I think Shannon's a good lady, and I think she's done a lot that, people tend to overlook how much she's done for the sport. And they kind of keep her in the background. And I hope she goes, down in MMA history as one of the most influential promoters ever. So anyway, thanks for the question. Oh, Penny's awake. Say hi. Okay, so this next question is from Teen Gohan. And it says, you have quite a bit of TKO wins, especially compared to other female fighters. What I'm trying to say is, where'd you learn to throw hands, girl? Who is your striking coach? Well, to be honest with you, I have a ton of TKO wins because I had a coach that was a longtime wrestler and a jiu-jitsu black belt. And so what we did was we would just take women down and beat their head in. And that was how I got so many TKO wins. So they almost all came on the ground. And I really didn't learn any striking until 2013 is when I really started working on my striking and actually had a proper striking coach. But before that, I think I was 5-0 with almost no striking. And I would just, walk out there, take women down, and then ground and pound to a TKO win. Right when I got into Invicta is when I first started with a proper striking coach that really started helping me. And then 2 years ago, I came to the lab where I've made even more progress since then. But really, I've only had a striking coach in any form for about the last 3 years. So coming along as fast as I can. But yeah, I'm super grateful for that. And that's still my favorite way to win is ground and pound. So good question. Here's another question from Wild. What are your thoughts on a 145-pound women's division and whether there are enough skilled women to create it? Would you entertain moving up? And the answer is no. I would never go back to the 145 division. I started fighting at 145 when I first started MMA. I think my first I think my first 4 fights were at 145. And yeah, my first 4 fights were at 145. And I, just as I've progressed in my career and gotten more athletic and kind of lost some of the fat and gained more muscle and gotten leaner, my weight has actually gone down quite a bit. So, I'm a natural bantamweight, and I'm even a little small for the bantamweight division. If I was going to move divisions at all, I would go down to the 125 division, which is probably actually ideal for me. My cut to 135 is pretty much non-existent anymore. I don't really cut much weight, before I go to weigh in or anything like that. And, if I had half a mind to, I could easily make 125. And as far as a 145 division, I just think that there's not a lot of women at this time that are skilled enough to make a really big division in the UFC. So in Invicta, they do have some talented 145ers, and I think Bellator has a few also. And maybe if you took all the women from Invicta and all the women from Bellator and put them all in the UFC, it might be enough to make a proper 145 division. But really, a division that is viable and is going to have, good fights and enough to give everybody a couple fights and make contenders and stuff like that, you're going to need, at least like 15 or 20 women at least. And even with that low of a number, It's going to be hard to replace fighters if they get hurt before a fight. It's going to be hard to, have contendership matches that go into championship matches. I think it's just really difficult with such a low number of women to make a really viable division that's really deep. So I would say you probably need 25 to 30 women to make a really, awesome division. So I think it's coming along in Invicta, and as time progresses, I think there's going to be more and more 145ers that are very athletic and very good, but we're not quite there yet. There are some really good ones out there, but I don't think there's a ton of them. Let's see, this next question. Oh, I really liked this. This is from Alcoholer. If there was a Mount Rushmore of MMA, whose 4 faces would you pick to be chiseled in stone? And almost immediately I thought Carano, Cyborg, Ronda, and Tate. And I just think that, those women have done so much for the sport, and they are the OGs of the sport. And of course, there's a lot of other women that could make a case. But if it were up to me, that's who I would put. Gina Carano, Chris Cyborg, Ronda Rousey, and Miesha Tate. This next question again is from PND. Do you watch your diet in between fights? I do. I try to. I try not to get too crazy eating out all the time, but honestly, my diet is probably one of the last things that I've really, taken control of in my fight career. So I went a really, really, really long time just eating whatever I wanted and not paying too much attention to my nutrition until it was time to cut weight. I was always okay at dieting, but I didn't really know what I was doing. And just in the last 6 or 8 months, I started really looking into, the effects of what I'm putting in my body and how does it make me faster or slower or feel better or think clearer. And the results have been pretty surprising. So probably in the last half a year, I really did start watching my nutrition in between fights, and not just to keep my weight down, but also so that I don't feel so tired, after a workout, or so that I don't feel sluggish, or so that I can recover better. And I noticed that mentally, when I eat better, I feel more positive. I tend to think a little bit more clearly. I don't feel so muddled in my head. Whereas if I eat like a lot of flour or a lot of sugar or a lot of processed foods, it not only affects me physically, but it really affects me mentally and even emotionally too. So I've really started trying to look at that and do some research on how I can be better, not just in fight camp, but in between fights too. And kind of the answer that I've gotten is, less flour and sugar and preservatives. So if I can avoid those and eat more whole grains and less processed food and cut out sugar, I think I'm doing pretty well. And the last question from PND, what are your thoughts on USADA and how they seem to be taking charge of the cheaters in your sport? And I love USADA. I think it's a great program. I think it's wonderful. And there have been a lot of fighters, men and women both, in the UFC that since USADA came along, they started losing fights and they started fighting like shit. And I think that's pretty indicative that there was a problem in the sport. And one of the greatest things about being an athlete to me is seeing people push the limits of the human body without supplements, without, bringing in all these external factors. I'm not a big fan of supplements. I don't really, I barely even use protein to get by. I don't take any supplements except for like a protein shake every once in a while. And I hate the idea that people would take steroids in this sport in order to be successful. I think it's just really doing not just their opponents a disservice, but just the whole idea of MMA, because to me, one of the greatest things about this sport is that we are pushing the limits of the human body and seeing what we're capable of. And when you start taking in all these external things that are going to help you achieve that, then it's no longer about what the human body can do. It's about like who has the best pharmacist and who can get the best steroids and who has the best drugs. And I don't see the point in that. So anyway, great question. I love USADA. I'm happy every time they show up for me. And I hope they continue to, revamp what this sport looks like, because now the guys that you're seeing that are very successful are the guys that are clean and they're doing it on their own. So that's super important to me. All right, so the next question is, how do you feel about some of the techniques that aren't allowed, like soccer kicks, knees on the ground, 12 to 6 elbows, etc.? Do you think those techniques should be allowed, or do you think the current set of rules is appropriate? And I think the only rule that is like super inappropriate is probably the 12 to 6 elbows. I think that's just stupid. You know, who cares what angle my elbow is coming at? Um, but the other rules, like the soccer kicks to the head and, you know, knees to the head of a grounded opponent, I think they're appropriate to keep the sport safe. You know, like at the end of the day, a fighter's safety is the most important thing. And we all want to be able to go home concussion free and remember our, you know, our names and our kids' names when we're 60 years old. And so I think that, you know, no knees to the head of a grounded opponent, no kicks to the head of a grounded opponent, I think is fair in that sense. But if the commission were to take those rules away, I wouldn't necessarily complain about it. I think it would make the sport a little more dangerous in terms of like traumatic brain injury, and that's a serious issue. That's important, but it would also give fighters, you know, more chances, more opportunities to finish these fights. So yeah, I think as far as like strikes to the head of a grounded opponent with your knees or kicks, um, you know, I think there's pros and cons to those rules. So, but the 12 to 6 elbows thing is totally stupid. The next question is, did you grow up hunting and fishing? Being from Alaska, would you consider yourself an outdoorsy type? And the answer is no. I'm not the outdoorsy type. I like I said, I always wanted to be from like a big city and live the big city life. And that includes like staying in fancy hotels and room service and having a maid come in and clean up, you know, your room and fluff your pillows and stuff like that. That's the kind of stuff that I'm into, is kind of being pampered. And I don't like being cold and tired and wet. And those are kind of the things that I associate with like camping and hunting and fishing. So a lot of my friends are super into that kind of stuff, and they love being outside and they think it's really beautiful. And I agree that it's very beautiful, but you know, I'll look at pictures for scenery, or I'll take a look from my car window at the scenery outside or something. But as far as going on like big hunting and camping and fishing trips, I'm not really into all that. I would really, you know, I will if it means hanging out with my friends, I'll go with them. But I would rather hang out with my friends in another setting. So that's just my personal preference. I know it's kind of lame, but I'm just not really the outdoorsy type. I could not be a hunter because I'm such an animal lover, and I mean, I eat meat and everything, so I'm not against hunting, but I just couldn't do it myself. I'm too much of a baby for that. And yeah, I think I did my fair share of camping on the fire crew. I was on a wildland fire crew in Alaska, and camping was literally our job. We would live out in the woods in these tents, and then we would hike all day and go fight fire. And I think I did enough camping in that summer that I was a wildland firefighter for like 14 people for a lifetime. So I'm good. I'm good on the outdoors. The next question is, what is your favorite aspect of MMA? And I don't really have like one favorite martial art, but I think just the idea of putting all those martial arts together and transitioning from one to the next and making that as fluid as possible, to me is really interesting. I think it's really difficult, and it's something that I think everybody, even the UFC champions, could get better at. And the guys that are really successful are the guys that can put their striking right into their wrestling, from their wrestling back into their striking, right into a takedown, you know, seamlessly moves into their jiu-jitsu, striking on the ground, you know, using your wrestling to get up off your back. Things like that, I think, are just, I think it's so high level when people can start putting all the martial arts together to become a mixed martial artist. To me, is the most fascinating part of MMA. And there's so many ways that people are doing that, and there's so many different styles that, for me, that's what keeps it exciting to watch. And that's what, when I really like a fighter, usually it's because they're very good at putting it all together and they're really dynamic. The next question is from Caveman BJJ. Being a purple belt, what was the hardest and easiest thing to pick up in BJJ? And I think the easiest thing for me, because I'm so strong for my size, I think the easiest thing for me was learning how to control people from top. So like if I get mount on a person and, you know, or side control, it's hard for them to move, and it's easy for me to do damage there. And that's why I have so many TKO wins, because I just got really good at being heavy on top and you know, limiting people's escapes from those positions. But the hardest thing for me to pick up in jiu-jitsu is definitely how how to move in the gi. So when I'm wearing the traditional, jiu-jitsu gi or the kimono, and people grab my sleeves, or they grab the fabric, the collar or the fabric on the back of my gi, or they're grabbing my pant legs, for me, that's really hard to deal with. And it's one of the things I really like about no gi. I'm a 2-time no gi world champion because it's so hard for me to move in the gi. I'm way better at no gi, but I am committed to I'm committed to getting better in the gi, and I want to progress through the belt system, and so part of that is going to be learning how to deal with that. The next question, there isn't a next question. It just says, thanks again for being so generous with your time and showing the community some love. And I just wanted to say thank you guys so much for the awesome questions and giving me the opportunity to come in here and share some of my thoughts with you. It means a lot to me. Thanks a lot, you guys. Have a great day.